Thanks for everybody showing up. There's a lot of people, a lot more than I expected. I guess we're going to have to get a bigger venue next time. Yeah, so this meeting, we're having two guest speakers. Darren White will be the first guest speaker, and his talk is on the relevance of religion and spirituality in an increasingly atheist society. And then we'll have Frater Cincinnatus, an initiate of the Temple of Set, and he'll be giving a talk on Our Patron, is the title of the talk. So enjoy. Darren?
Hi there. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Based on that statement, it's obvious that I'm a Thelemite, and I'm speaking somewhat from a Thelemic perspective, not a specifically Thelemic perspective, but a generally Thelemic perspective on the subject of the relevance of religion and spirituality in an increasingly atheistic culture. It is my will to get people thinking about and discussing the relevance and utility of religion in our modern and increasingly atheistic world. And in order to do this, I feel it necessary to first take a look at a factor which I believe has traditionally been a driving force behind a great deal of negative human behavior in general, including the negative results of religious influence in the West, causing the modern backlash against religion, which is ironically itself driven by the same factor. I might refer to this factor as binary thinking. I'm referring to the habit of making hard-line demarcations between self and other, us and them, good and evil, right and wrong, etc., etc. On the surface, these things seem to be very straightforward and natural assertions, and whilst they are useful demarcations in many day-to-day situations, they also lead to deep and unconsciously made assumptions which are the basis of biases that are often blinding. Horus and Set is an apt title for this pair of talks. In general, Horus was said to be associated with the Black Earth, that is, the fertile soil, and Lower Egypt, whereas Set was associated with Red Earth, or the desert lands and their oases, and Upper Egypt. It might be thought that one of these two gods would inevitably win out over the other, and in fact, Horus did win out in the end. However, Horus and Set both continue to be equally present in the Egyptian mythos, with pharaohs being seen as a fusion of both deities. This seems to demonstrate the pharaohs as embodying both cosmic polarities as represented by Horus and Set, with the two gods representing respectively the fertile lands and the desert, as well as Lower and Upper Egypt. The fusion of the two would demonstrate the pharaoh's dominion over both. Duality has always been a common religious and philosophical theme, but it is, of course, easiest to speak about in a religious context when discussing the Christian polarities of God and Satan. The name Satan actually derives from a Hebrew word meaning adversary, as is popularly cited by Satanists, Luciferians, and other left-hand havers. And the function of Satan is one of playing the role of the adversary. Throughout the Middle Ages and onward, this duality was utilized in order to draw a hard line in the sand. Either you were with us and on the side of God, or you were in league with or beguiled by Satan. This makes for an extremely effective religious and political tool, driving the majority under a shared banner by means of fear, self-righteousness, or the simple fact that doing what's right has conveniently become an incredibly easy black and white choice to make, requiring, though it often does, that one represses one's natural appetites and emotions. It also makes the demonization of the other extremely easy, whether that other is another state, religion, or just the neighbor next door who coincidentally happens to represent competition for you or happens to have property or possessions you'd like for yourself. I would incidentally like to emphasize that this is a very simplistic generalization by which I hope to elucidate some of the problems that manifest from this kind of binary thinking, which might equally be demonstrated in any number of other religions or philosophies, not to mention politics, sciences, and other modes of thought. so I'm not picking on Christianity, it's just the easiest example. Now, if we take the negative connotations away from the idea of the adversarial perspective, and instead of positing one thing as good and its opposite as evil, we could instead see things in terms of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. Crowley uses the image of a triangle to illustrate this idea, with the opposites of thesis and antithesis positing, so we have thesis and antithesis positing the base of the triangle, this synthesis of which asserts a transcendent apex above the center. The Kabbalistic tree of life also offers a handy illustration of this idea of polarities with its right and left columns, or pillars, the balance between which is found in the central pillar. The oft-quoted phrase from Liber Libri, the Book of the Balance, is, "Remember that unbalanced force is evil, that unbalanced severity is but cruelty and oppression, but that also unbalanced mercy is but weakness which would aid or allow and abet evil." Again in Liber Sadi we find, "I reveal unto you a great mystery. Ye stand between the abyss of height and the abyss of depth. In either awaits you a companion, and that companion is yourself. You can have no other companion. Many have arisen, being wise. They have said, seek out the glittering image in the place ever golden, and unite yourselves with it. Many have arisen, being foolish. They have said, stoop down unto the darkly splendid world, and be wedded to that blind creature of the slime. I, who am beyond wisdom and folly, arise and say unto you, achieve both weddings. Unite yourselves with both. Beware, beware, I say, lest ye seek after the one and lose the other. My adepts stand upright, their head above the heavens, their feet below the hells. But since one is naturally attracted to the angel and another to the demon, let the first strengthen the lower link, the last attach more firmly to the higher. Thus shall equilibrium become perfect." Now, I feel that this is a very important concept to fortify that part of you which is naturally weaker and which you may find yourself disinclined towards. However, it seems very common for people to use this passage to justify or emphasize the idea of exploring the dark side with all its rebellious and anti-Christian sentiment. But those who tend to emphasize this tend also to be drawn to the dark side of things, and in fact the passage would specifically counsel them to attach more firmly to the higher. The idea here again is balance. We always find ourselves viewing the world from a specific perspective, and we generally think we're right. We generally think we're right in the way we view the world. To invoke the adversarial idea is to be willing to really and seriously question our own ideas, beliefs, and worldviews. If we can hold ourselves up to deep and serious scrutiny, we may find that our assumptions and ideas begin to crumble, or we may find they hold firm, perhaps vindicated or even fortified by the fires of our self-directed skepticism. But either way, if we learn not to fear the process, but to appreciate it, if we can accept that it's okay to discover we may be wrong, or that we may not have as complete a picture of the world as we thought, if we learn to let go of the security in feeling right, we can develop a habit over time of creating for ourselves an unending sequence of triangles, a base formed by becoming aware of our current understanding, opposing this with serious self-questioning that may apparently destroy this understanding, leading to the apex of a deeper understanding. Such a process can be continued ad infinitum, which gives one a clear understanding of just how infirm any belief really is, and hopefully a sense of humility about how much one really knows. On this note, I'd like to quote a chapter from Crowley's Book of Lies, including his commentary. Chapter 45, Chinese Music. The commentary begins with, we now for the first time attack the question of doubt. The Soldier and the Hunchback, which is a paper by Crowley on the subject of skepticism and doubt. The Soldier and the Hunchback should be carefully studied in this connection. The attitude recommended is skepticism, but a skepticism under control. Doubt inhibits action as much as faith blinds it. All the best popes have been atheists, but perhaps the greatest of them once remarked, quantum nobis prodest haec fabula Christi, which is Latin for how we are helped by this fable of Christ. Now, I omit the first portion of the actual chapter proper, just because it's easier to understand in the context of the visual layout on the page, and I pick it up with, proof is only possible in mathematics, and mathematics is only a matter of arbitrary conventions. And yet doubt is a good servant, but a bad master, a perfect mistress, but a nagging wife. White is white is the lash of the overseer. White is black is the watchword of the slave. The master takes no heed. In the comment, Crowley says, the ruler asserts facts as they are, hence white is white. The slave has therefore no option but to deny them passionately in order to express his discontent, hence white is black. The master, in technical language the magus, does not concern himself with facts. He does not care whether a thing is true or not. He uses truth and falsehood indiscriminately to serve his ends. Slaves consider him immoral and preach against him in Hyde Park. This is very important, as I believe it represents a fundamental shift away from the binary mentality I have been speaking of. Friedrich Nietzsche sounded a similar note with his idea of going beyond good and evil, and leaving behind binary modes of thought. It would be easy to read into the above passage that what Crowley is advocating is lying or telling the truth as needed, but my impression is that a more interesting way of looking at it in its context would be that the master or magus doesn't cling to something being true or false, instead realizing such hang-ups are more often than not mere distractions. This is elaborated on in the lines to follow. So we pick back up in the text. The Chinese cannot help thinking that the octave has 5 notes. The more necessary anything appears to my mind, the more certain it is that I only assert a limitation. I slept with faith and found a corpse in my arms on awaking. I drank and danced all night with doubt and found her a virgin in the morning. The comment reads, in paragraphs 7 and 8 we find a most important statement, a practical aspect of the fact that all truth is relative. And in the last paragraph we see how skepticism keeps the mind fresh, whereas faith dies in the very sleep that it induces. The line about Chinese music, the line about Chinese thinking the octave has 5 notes is, of course, in contrast to the Western tradition of separating the octave into the 7 notes which produce the familiar do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do sound. This is so deeply ingrained in our own group mind that it seems almost to have been preordained from on high that it should be so. It is also why, for instance, Indian music can seem so exotic with its quarter tones. The division of the notes within the octave is in fact more or less arbitrary, however. In fact, the idea that truth is relative is further carried over with the fact that the sounds of the notes are always relative to the root note. Any given note will take on a different quality of an emotional tone or flavor dependent upon its relation to whatever is emphasized as the root note. One of my favorite lines in Crowley is, the more necessary anything appears to my mind, the more certain it is that I only assert a limitation. I might have phrased it, any time I posit something as true, I am in fact merely establishing a boundary beyond which I am unwilling to go. A somewhat trite example might be that of the European authorities who persecuted those who first began claiming the Earth orbited the Sun, rather than vice versa. No matter how angry they may have been at such a transgressive idea, no matter how they clung to what they believed to be the truth, they had no bearing on the actual underlying truth. And in the end, they were only preventing themselves and others from benefiting from a more accurate picture of the universe. Such examples are always simple to spot in hindsight, and it's very easy for us to feel smug about our naive predecessors. But such examples should allure us to the fact that we are inevitably succumbing to similarly erroneous misconceptions ourselves, blinded by the naive assumption that we know the truth. In science, it is those who are willing to go beyond the accepted conventions who blaze new trails in our understanding of the universe. Learning to accept that one hasn't got the answers is an important and formidable step. It allows one to learn to use truth and falsehood indiscriminately. It also makes it much easier for one to progress more easily from one state of understanding to the next, as one becomes much more flexible and able to move from perspective to perspective. no longer rigidly gritting down on one notion of how things are, and no longer prone to catastrophic explosions when one's current views are challenged. The habit of binary thinking, producing amongst other things the us or them mentality, and the seduction of believing we have certain things pegged down as certainly true, are by no means restricted to either religious or secular thinking alone. They are instead all too easy traps for anyone to fall into at any time. And they are also self-justifying by any means, whatever means happen to be suit the occasion. Today, the dogma of science has replaced that of religion. Its proponents very often downplay religion and spirituality as being childish nonsense derived from the ghosts and shadows of our foolish past. Those willing to look at religion and spirituality in a serious light as legitimate components of the human condition are much less common or popular than those whose interest is only to ridicule spirituality as superstitious and childish nonsense, and to attack religions as hate-mongering fairy tale cults. But I believe this is itself a very childish and precipitous attitude to take, and effectively it is to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Whatever negativity is manifested in the world as a result of religion, and obviously there's an immense amount that has, that's not the whole story of religion, just as belief in imaginary characters does not explain off spirituality. Spirituality can be called the exploration of the inner world of the human being, and the laboratory within which spiritual work is done is the laboratory of the mind. And the state and condition of that mind determines whether the laboratory is clean and uncompromised or a chaos of turmoil. A mind that is unwilling to test its ideas about the ways things are, a mind that has already established a boundary beyond which it is unwilling to go, is going to have defenses up which prevent it from exploring its own depths freely, and it often takes a pretty jarring process of breaking down such barriers in order to free it up. On the other side of the spectrum, too free a mind is susceptible to going off on wild tangents, and very often can get lost in fantasy lands that it allows itself to buy into, or to become fascinated and obsessed by some of the things it discovers in its explorations due to losing its objectivity. This can sometimes lead to mental breakdown. The trick, once again, is striking a balance, and this is usually best served by oscillating between states, from prudent to daring, from merciful to severe, even from atheist to theist. One is well served to remember that the individual can be said to be a process rather than a hard and fast thing. Rather than saying I am X, it can be helpful to instead say it is useful for me to consider myself X whilst it suits me, or at this time I exhibit the qualities of X. Even here, there's great facility in holding firm to certain things, but it helps to check in every so often, challenging our own assumptions and testing the actual state of affairs. So, what is the role of religion and spirituality in our modern, increasingly atheistic culture? It is my hope that we can learn to move away from binary thinking so that we can discuss it without being dismissive, without being defensive, and without feeling threatened. Love is the law, love is the will. So clearly my goal here is not so much to actually explain what the role is, but to get us thinking clearly about it rather than being biased, which it's so easy to be when you discuss religion or politics. So. Yeah, any questions or statements or criticisms?
So with this article you're saying it's important to have an open mind.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you're saying that like if you're stuck in one way of thinking and it's not working, you know, just kind of change it around and maybe it will grow, right?
Yeah, and learning that sometimes whether or not something is working is something we can't necessarily see a lot of the time. So it's important to challenge your sort of assumptions about things.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy for any of us to sort of get like trapped into a sort of mindset of like this is how things are, and then anytime that subject comes up and somebody has a differing point of view, it's easy to get defensive and be no, you're wrong. This is how it is. You're an idiot. You know what I mean? So, and I think that's a really important thing for us to be aware of. because this is why you can't really discuss politics with anybody who's passionate about politics. You know what I mean? It's like you're not discussing, you're arguing. That's wonderful if that's what you're into. If you're, if you're a huge sports fan, but you feel a little bit too old to be watching sports, then maybe politics is the thing for you. But yeah, so I think it's really important that we sort of analyze our own assumptions about things. In fact, it comes you look at science and the way that science has been analyzing the universe around us, and there's amazing things that have been done through the scientific process and scientific analysis, but the great scientists out there are the ones who don't make assumptions about things. The ones who say, you don't know what you're talking about because science says this. Those are the ones who are, the ones that end up being close-minded about things. They're the ones that put a limit on how far they're willing to go. The ones that go farther are like the Einsteins, who are able to visualize things and look at things in different ways, rather than just. Einstein, he was getting insights into relativity not just from doing the mathematics, but from watching waves go out as he was swimming, waves going out before him, and envisioning things and playing with these things and letting them sort of saturate his mind in a more than intellectual manner. So I think that's there's a lot of examples within the scientific realm that to show. Go ahead.
First of all, your talk was really great.
Oh, thank you.
But also, I really agree with, there was a section where Crowley was saying, and you repeated it and rephrased it a little bit, about how, when I say this is the truth, I'm placing a line that I can't cross. And that can become really easy to do, especially if you really internalize certain things as core parts of your identity. I'm an atheist, or I am this particular person. I see things only from this perspective, I think that this other path is bullshit, basically,
Yeah.
And then because you start to see it as an attack on your own philosophy, as an attack against yourself as an individual, you know, especially, and that can become really popular with some pop atheism, where it's kind of oh, well, I'm a rational human being who doesn't believe in fairy tales, you know what I mean? And then you start to attack people for
and that the method of attack tells you more about the person than it does about the people who are attacking. Because usually when you have somebody who's their argument is I'm a rational person, so I believe in atheism, or I'm an atheist or whatever. And people who are religious are believing in flying spaghetti monsters and they're killing each other. And people don't. I saw this meme floating around that was it was something like gods don't kill people, people with gods kill people, and it's because Jeffrey Dahmer was probably a God-fearing Christian or something like that, right? It's okay, it's not just people with gods that kill people. That's a ridiculous, fallacious argument. So. And
then that's more about preserving your own belief in that and your identity as that than actually thinking about what are the socio-cultural, economic, and faculties and things in the background that are encouraging, let's say, wars between religious groups that may be entirely more about politics or economics, things like that. They just happen to identify themselves neatly into religious groups and so on and so forth. So you're not really looking for the truth of how to solve the problem. You just want a convenient band-aid and say see, this is exactly how it is, and no one is smart enough to me to understand it.
Yeah, and it's very if you think, instead of somebody saying I am this and then taking them at their face value, if you start to think about why they're that and what they're getting out of being that, a lot of the time it does end up being it's about their personal identity, and it gives them an excuse to be an asshole, if that happens to be the case, you know what I mean? And I think that's very common within religions, particularly religions where you have to be you have to act a certain way in order to live up to it, because people will find their way of expressing themselves even in a case where they're not allowed to express certain aspects of themselves, and they'll do that by getting really fanatical about something and then getting violent over it and saying God wants you dead. You know what I mean? It's no, I want you dead. That would be what you would say if you were actually taking responsibility for But I think that's something I didn't touch on at all in this talk, but I think personal responsibility is the wave of the future, I suppose. That's the major thing that I see as being sort of the next step for us in a big way. It's learning that each of us is individually has a certain set of rights, but we are all responsible and that's a big thing. Like, you are responsible for your entire present state, which goes beyond just like, okay, you did this, this, and this. Well, everything in your environment is some product of who you have been, and you have like massive abilities to change that. And if you are playing the sort of victim mentality where you're like, why does this always happen to me, or I can't help it, or I'm just in this sort of weak place, it's like, as long as you keep believing that, then you've set a boundary that you're not willing to go beyond.
I was going to say something else. When it comes to Christianity, I think most people, like, when you say something that offends somebody, I think they jump to Christianity as like a claim or a title. For example, I told you earlier, I did this reading for this person, and then I had my card mat, and then I had the picture of Baphomet, and then she got, oh, this is evil, devilish stuff, and then I'm trying to explain what the inverted pentagram is, but she's all caught up with like what she think it is. Telling her it's the...
So her preconceptions end up like trumping anything.
Yeah, and then right away she jumps to, oh, I'm Catholic, I don't believe in that. So then I'm like, are you a practicing Catholic? Are you? I'm just like, oh, I was brought up Catholic. Well, you practice now? Like, no, then you're not a Catholic. So then so I think they just grab hold onto it when they see something that's offensive to them.
Yeah, and that's a good example of how it becomes part of their identity. And it's not so much about whether they're doing something that actively makes them a Catholic. It's that they just latch onto that as part of their identity.
And then they go to then they go on to like, I know the Bible. But in my opinion, I like to think a Satanist knows the Bible more than a Christian.
It's very often the case.
Well, they say Satan can quote the Bible chapter and verse for his own purposes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then you can pick out things that they're doing, but then you say, oh, you're a Christian, but you're going clubbing later.
Well, that's the thing, and it's like a lot of people who proclaim themselves to be Christians, well, I mean, there's all kinds of possible examples you can give of this. I remember when I was working in a factory when I was younger, there was like an argument sort of between these two guys. There was an older guy who was a forklift driver, and there was the younger guy who was just sort of like the country bumpkin kind of guy. And the country bumpkin guy was saying he was an atheist, and the older guy was basically saying, okay, well, I can't believe you're an atheist. I'm going to heaven. I'll be going up that that escalator into the sky, waving to you as you're going down to hell because you don't believe in God. It's like, meanwhile, this guy is like cheating on his wife and like, just a despicable, shitty person. And it's like, okay, I don't think you're just automatically going to heaven because you claim to believe in God.
Well, he's using pride as an outlet, and that's one of the sins.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
There you go.
But yeah, that's the thing. It's like, I think it's important for people to have their freedom of belief and their freedom of expression and all that kind of thing. But it's like, it's just sad to see when people, are just hypocritical and ignorant.
And they just claim Christianity when something offends them. Not that they follow it. It's just, oh, I don't like that, I'm a Christian.
Yeah, it's just an easy fallback. So. But anyway, I take it that's my time to swap it over, so thank you very much. Love is law, love is.
Thanks again, Darren, for giving that talk and the discussion afterwards. So that was the Horus section of the Horus and Set, the theme of the day. Next, we're moving on to Frater Cincinnatus' talk, which will be the Set portion of the talks. Thank you very much, Frater Cincinnatus, for giving that talk and explaining to us about your interpretation of Setian Philosophy. And thanks again, Darren. And thanks to you, everybody, for showing up here and bearing with us for the kind of the venue issues. This is something that we're going to be doing regularly. Hopefully, we'd like to do it probably about every other week. And it looks like Saturday is a good day because we had a very good turnout today. Yeah, I mean, basically we're going to just have different people give talks on different subjects that they prepared. members and also guest speakers, just to educate so we can all learn from each other. It's not just going to be one person giving the same talk over and over and basically preaching at everyone. This is about us all learning from one another and sharing. And I really appreciate that you all came out. We're probably going to go someplace after here for coffee or maybe beers, something like that. And you're all welcome to come, and we can continue the conversation on a less formal level. And that's it. Thanks for all coming.